The cosmic order, how the world is structured. When we think about the universe, we often imagine vast emptiness, stars scattered across an infinite void, the cold silence of space stretching out in every direction. But in the ancient world, in the texts and traditions that shaped so much of our spiritual understanding, the cosmos was seen very differently. It wasn't empty at all. It was structured, ordered, filled with purpose and presence. Imagine, if you will, a mountain. Not just any mountain, but a holy mountain. A cosmic mountain that reaches up from the earth and touches the very fabric of heaven itself. In biblical tradition, places like Mount Zion weren't just geographic locations. They were meeting points, intersections where the divine and the earthly came together, where heaven bent down to touch the world of mortals. These weren't ordinary places. They were access points, centers of the world, where the boundaries between realms grew thin and permeable. When the ancients spoke of holy mountains, they were describing something profound. The idea that certain places in our world serve as doorways, as gathering points for beings both human and divine. And who gathered at these cosmic meeting points? This is where the structure becomes even more intricate, more fascinating. The God of these ancient texts wasn't alone, wasn't a solitary figure sitting in distant silence. No, God was attended by hosts, by armies, by a cosmic court of angelic beings. The title Lord of Hosts appears again and again throughout Scripture. Lord of Hosts. Say it slowly and let it settle in your mind. What does that mean, hosts? It means armies, vast organized ranks of celestial beings. Not chaotic, not random, but structured like a military. Like a royal court with ranks and orders and hierarchies that mirror earthly kingdoms but exist on a cosmic scale. These weren't simple messenger angels. This was an entire civilization of heavenly beings, organized and purposeful, each with their role in the grand architecture of creation. Later traditions would crystallize this even further. 7 archangels, standing before the throne of God. 7. That number of completeness, of cosmic perfection. 7 days of creation, 7 seals, 7 churches, 7 stars. The number appears over and over because it represents totality, wholeness, the full measure of divine order. These 7 weren't just servants. They were the highest of the high, the inner circle, the ones who stood in the direct presence of the divine and carried out the most important tasks in the cosmic order. Their names would become famous. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and others depending on which tradition you follow. Each one associated with specific roles, specific spheres of influence in the grand design. But the structure goes even deeper than this. Because in some of these ancient texts, we find a remarkable idea, that angels themselves were assigned to rule over nations. Not just to watch over them, but to govern them, to be their spiritual princes. Think about what this means. Every nation on earth, every kingdom, every people, had an angelic prince assigned to it. Geopolitics wasn't just about human ambition and conflict. It was a reflection of something happening in the heavenly realms. When nations clashed on earth, their angelic princes were locked in spiritual combat in the heavens. This turned the entire map of the world into a spiritual chessboard. Every border, every alliance, every war, it all had a cosmic dimension. Human rulers might think they were making their own decisions, charting their own courses, but above them, invisible to mortal eyes, their angelic princes were engaged in their own complex struggles and alliances. The prophet Daniel speaks of this directly. The angelic messenger tells him about being delayed by the prince of Persia. Not a human ruler, but an angelic being assigned to that nation, who had to be overcome before the message could get through. This wasn't metaphor. This was cosmology, a detailed description of how the spiritual and political realms intertwined. And then there's the imagery of stars. Beautiful, distant stars scattered across the night sky. In our modern world, we know what stars are: distant suns, balls of burning gas light years away. But in the ancient understanding, stars were something else entirely. They were symbols, representations, sometimes even the actual forms of heavenly beings. When Scripture speaks of the stars of heaven, it's often speaking about angels. The morning stars singing together at creation. The stars that fought against Sisera. The imagery weaves back and forth between the celestial lights we see in the sky and the celestial beings that populate the heavenly realms. This is why the image of falling stars carries such weight. When John's revelation describes stars falling from heaven, when Isaiah speaks of the morning star cast down, these aren't just astronomical events. They're describing angelic rebellion, the fall of heavenly beings from their places in the cosmic order. A falling star is a fallen angel, a light extinguished, a being that once held a place in the grand structure now cast out, tumbling down from the heights of heaven to the depths below. All of this, the cosmic mountains, the angelic hosts, the 7 archangels, the princes of nations, the stars as heavenly beings, all of it describes a universe that is deeply, intricately ordered. Not random, not empty, but structured like a vast cathedral with every stone in its place, every being fulfilling its role in a design almost too grand to comprehend. The ancient world looked up at the night sky and saw not just points of light, but a cosmic hierarchy, a spiritual organization that gave meaning to everything that happened on earth. Every event, every rise and fall of kingdoms, every victory and defeat, it all echoed something larger, something happening in realms just beyond our sight. And at the center of it all, at the peak of the cosmic mountain where heaven and earth meet, there was order. There was structure. There was a divine architecture to existence itself. This is the world as the ancients understood it. Not a lonely planet spinning in empty space, but a cosmos alive with purpose, organized with infinite care, structured from the highest heaven down to the lowest earth in one grand, interconnected whole. Rebellion in heaven, when order breaks. We've spoken about order, about structure, about the grand cosmic hierarchy that organized heaven and earth into one magnificent whole. But what happens when that order breaks? What happens when beings who were meant to maintain the structure choose instead to shatter it? This is one of the most haunting themes in ancient biblical and mystical literature. The idea that heaven itself, perfect, ordered, divine heaven, was once the site of a rebellion. A cosmic uprising that fractured the very foundations of creation. The scriptures hint at this rebellion in fragments, in brief mentions, in cryptic passages that seem to point toward something larger, something more complete that existed in the oral traditions and the texts that circled around the canon. But it's in the Enochic literature, in the Book of Enoch and related writings, that we find the full, disturbing story told in vivid detail. According to these texts, there were angels, beings of light and power, who looked down from heaven and saw something that sparked desire in them. They saw the daughters of men. They saw beauty on earth. And they made a choice. A catastrophic choice. They descended. They left their appointed stations in the heavenly hierarchy. They abandoned their posts and came down to earth, taking human wives, teaching forbidden knowledge, mingling the heavenly with the earthly in ways that violated the very structure of creation. These were the Watchers, the ones who were supposed to observe, to guard, to maintain. Instead, they became the ones who transgressed. And the consequences were terrible. The Enochic texts describe their punishment in imagery that still sends shivers down the spine millennia later. These rebel angels weren't simply destroyed. They were bound, imprisoned, cast into pits deep within the earth or chained under mountains, held there in darkness until the day of final judgment. Imagine it, beings who once moved freely through the heavens, who once stood in the presence of God, now trapped in absolute darkness, chained in pits, pressed under the weight of mountains, waiting for untold ages for a judgment that has not yet come. Some texts describe these prisons in specific terms. There are valleys of fire. There are chains of iron. There are dark abysses where the fallen angels writhe and cry out, but no one hears them. No one comes to release them. They made their choice, and now they endure the consequences in realms hidden from mortal sight, deep in the bones of the earth itself. The Book of Enoch describes Enoch himself being taken on a tour of these prisons, seeing the bound angels, hearing their pleas. Some of them ask him to intercede, to carry their petition back to heaven, to beg for mercy. But the answer comes back. There will be no peace for them, no forgiveness. They knew what they were doing when they descended, and now they must remain in their prisons until the end of days. This imagery of imprisoned angels, of spirits bound in darkness, it echoes through later scriptures as well. In the New Testament, in the first letter of Peter, there's a strange and cryptic passage. It mentions spirits in prison, spirits to whom Christ proclaimed something after his death, spirits who had disobeyed long ago in the days of Noah. The days of Noah. The time of the Watchers. The age when angels descended and corrupted the earth, leading to the great flood that wiped clean the world. These imprisoned spirits, many ancient readers understood them to be those same fallen watchers, still bound in their dark prisons, now being proclaimed to by Christ himself in the days between his death and resurrection. What was proclaimed to them? The text doesn't fully say, but the image is powerful. Christ descending even to those deepest prisons, reaching even into those darkest places where the rebel angels wait. It suggests layers upon layers of spiritual geography, prisons beneath prisons, realms within realms, all part of the vast cosmic architecture. But here's what's fascinating. Even after the rebellion, even after the fall of the Watchers and the great disruption they caused, the heavenly hierarchy didn't simply collapse. It adapted. It reorganized. New structures emerged. In later Jewish mysticism, particularly in the traditions that would develop into Kabbalah and the writings of the Merkaba mystics, we encounter a figure who represents this reorganization. His name is Metatron. Metatron is described as the highest of angels, the prince of the divine presence, the celestial scribe who records every action, every word, every deed in the cosmic ledgers. Some traditions say he was once the human Enoch, the same Enoch who walked with God and was taken up to heaven without dying, transformed into an angelic being of immense power. Others see him as a primordial figure, existing from the beginning as God's chief agent in creation and governance. Regardless of his origins, Metatron represents something important. The idea that even after rebellion fractured the original order, hierarchy reasserted itself. Structure returned. Someone had to stand at the pinnacle of the angelic ranks. Someone had to maintain the records, execute the divine will, organize the remaining loyal angels into their proper stations. Metatron is sometimes called the Lesser YHWH, bearing a name that contains letters of the divine name itself, showing his exalted status. He sits on a throne in heaven. He wears a crown. He is attended by myriads of angels who serve him as he serves God. This development, this emergence of Metatron as a chief heavenly figure, it shows us something profound about how ancient traditions understood the aftermath of rebellion. The cosmos had to reorganize. New hierarchies had to form. The gaps left by the fallen had to be filled. Where there were once watchers who failed in their duty, now there are other angels, more faithful, keeping watch with renewed vigilance. Where there was once trust that angels would maintain their stations, now there are stronger bonds, clearer hierarchies, more explicit structures of loyalty and service. The rebellion didn't destroy order. It refined it. It made it stronger. It showed what happened when the structure was violated. And it showed that the structure could survive even the worst betrayal, could adapt and continue, could bind the rebels in their dark prisons and carry on with the cosmic work. And those prisons remain. Somewhere beneath our feet, in spiritual dimensions that intersect with physical mountains and valleys, the ancient texts tell us the rebel angels are still there. Still bound. Still waiting. Monuments to the price of rebellion. To what happens when beings created for order choose instead to embrace chaos. The Watchers watch no more. They sit in darkness. And above them, the reorganized heavens continue their eternal rotations, the loyal angels continuing the work that the rebels abandoned, maintaining the cosmic order that was fractured but never broken. This is what happens when order breaks. It doesn't simply collapse. It transforms. It adapts. And it ensures that those who broke it remain bound, imprisoned, examples for all time of the cost of rebellion against the divine structure of all that is. The giants and the birth of demons. The story of the Watchers, those rebel angels who descended to earth, it doesn't end with their imprisonment. In fact, in many ways, that's only the beginning. Because the Watchers didn't come to earth alone. They took wives. They had children. And those children, those offspring of angels and humans, they were something the world had never seen before. The book of Genesis mentions them briefly. The Nephilim, giants in the earth in those days. Mighty men of old, men of renown. Just a few verses, tantalizing and mysterious, hinting at something vast and terrible without fully explaining it. But the Enochic literature, and texts like the Book of Jubilees, they fill in the details. And the details are haunting. These children of the Watchers and human women, they were enormous. Giants, yes, but more than just tall. They were beings that shouldn't have existed. Hybrids. Mixtures of the heavenly and the earthly in a way that violated the natural order of creation. Angels were never meant to reproduce with humans. The boundaries between species, between kinds of beings, were meant to remain distinct. But those boundaries had been crossed. And what emerged was wrong. The giants were hungry. Impossibly, insatiably hungry. The texts describe them consuming everything. First the crops, then the animals, and finally, they turned on humanity itself. They became predators of the very humans from whom they were partly descended. Cannibals. Monsters. They grew so large and consumed so much that the earth itself groaned under their presence. The natural world couldn't sustain them. They were beings too powerful, too hungry, too fundamentally out of place in the created order. But here's where it gets even stranger. The Book of Jubilees describes something that Genesis doesn't mention. A third generation. Not just the Nephilim, the direct offspring of angels and humans, but their children. The grandchildren of the Watchers. These are sometimes called the Eliaud. Another layer of hybrid beings, further removed from their angelic ancestry but still carrying that corrupted mixture in their blood. Multiple generations of these creatures walking the earth, each one a testament to the original violation of cosmic order. The world before the flood, according to these texts, wasn't just morally corrupt. It was ontologically corrupted. The very categories of being had been scrambled. Angels, humans, and their impossible offspring all mixed together in a world spiraling into chaos. This is why the flood came. Not just to punish human wickedness, but to cleanse the earth of these hybrid creatures that should never have existed. To wash away the giants and their children. To reset creation and restore the boundaries that had been so catastrophically breached. The waters rose. The giants drowned. Their enormous bodies perished in the deluge that covered the earth. And one would think, that would be the end of it. The giants are gone. The hybrid races are destroyed. The world can start again with clean categories, with humans and angels back in their proper places. But the ancient texts tell us something else. Something that explains so much about the nature of evil in the world that came after. When the giants died, their bodies perished, but their spirits didn't. Couldn't. They were hybrids, remember. Part human, part angelic. Human spirits go to Sheol, to the realm of the dead. Angelic spirits, they're not meant to die at all. So what happens to the spirit of a being that's both and neither? According to the Book of Enoch and related traditions, those spirits became something new. Something that had never existed before. They became demons. Not fallen angels. That's important to understand. The Watchers themselves were bound in their prisons. But the spirits of their giant offspring, those remained free. Freed, in fact, from their enormous physical bodies. Now they were disembodied spirits, wandering the earth, filled with hunger and rage and resentment. These are the demons that plague humanity. Not angels who fell, but the ghosts of the giants. The remnant spirits of creatures that should never have existed, now eternally frustrated because they no longer have bodies, no longer have the ability to satisfy their endless appetites. They wander. They search. They look for bodies to inhabit, for people to oppress, for ways to recreate even a fraction of the chaos and corruption that characterized the world before the flood. This is why they're so hostile to humanity. We're alive. We have bodies. We live in the world they were driven from. They remember their existence, their power, their physical presence. And now they're reduced to shadows, to spirits without substance, forever trying to reclaim what they lost. Every demon, in this understanding, is the ghost of a giant. Every evil spirit that troubles humanity is a remnant of those days before the flood when the cosmic order was violated and hybrid beings walked the earth. The flood destroyed their bodies but couldn't destroy their spirits. So they remain, wandering, seeking, causing what trouble they can. They possess people when they can. They inspire wickedness. They work to recreate the corruption that characterized their original existence. And here's what's profound about this. It connects the primordial chaos of the antediluvian world, the world before the flood, directly to the ongoing spiritual warfare that humans experience. It's not random evil. It's not abstract wickedness. It's the continuing aftermath of that original rebellion. The Watchers are bound, yes, but their children's spirits still roam free. Every exorcism, every spiritual battle, every confrontation with evil spirits mentioned in Scripture, all of it traces back to those days when angels descended and giants walked the earth. The demons that Jesus casts out, that the apostles confront, that spiritual warriors battle through the ages, they're all the same things. The disembodied spirits of the Nephilim and the Eliaud, still causing chaos, still trying to corrupt and destroy. The world was cleansed by water. The giants drowned. But their spirits, their angry, hungry, homeless spirits, those endure. They are the link between the flood-era chaos and every manifestation of spiritual evil that came after. In a sense, we're still living in the aftermath of that ancient catastrophe. Still dealing with the consequences of what happened when the Watchers descended. The giants are gone, but their ghosts remain. And they will remain, according to these texts, until the final judgment, when even these wandering spirits will be dealt with once and for all. Until then, they wander. Disembodied, frustrated, hostile. The remnants of a race that should never have existed, now transformed into the demons that haunt the spaces between heaven and earth, forever seeking but never finding what they lost when the waters rose and their world, their corrupted, chaotic world, was washed away. This is the birth of demons. Not a separate creation of evil, but a consequence. The terrible, lingering consequence of rebellion in heaven and corruption on earth. The giants died, but in dying, they gave birth to something that would plague humanity for all the ages to come. Chaos monsters, God versus the deep. Before there was order, there was chaos. Before there was creation shaped and named and given purpose, there was the deep, the formless void, the waters that covered everything, pressing down with weight and darkness and the threat of complete dissolution. The opening of Genesis speaks of this moment. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. The deep. In Hebrew, it's Tiham, a word that echoes with ancient resonance, connected to older Mesopotamian myths of Tiamat, the primordial ocean goddess, the embodiment of chaos itself. But Genesis presents something remarkable. In the Babylonian myths, creation happens through violent combat. The gods war against Tiamat. They kill her. They split her body to make heaven and earth. Creation is born from divine violence against chaos. In Genesis, God simply speaks, "Let there be light." And there is light. The deep is not fought. It's ordered, separated, given boundaries. The chaotic waters are divided, some above, some below, and between them, space for life and breath and light. But the ancient Israelites knew the older stories. They knew about the combat myths. And in their poetry, in their psalms, in their prophetic imagery, that older pattern resurfaces. Not to say that's how creation actually happened, but to express a truth about God's relationship with chaos. A truth they understood deeply. That God is the one who subdues the forces that would unmake the world. And those forces, they had names. They had forms. They were pictured as monsters. Rahab. Not the woman who hid the spies in Jericho. That's a different name with different Hebrew letters. This Rahab is a sea monster. A dragon of the deep. A personification of the chaotic waters themselves, rising up in rebellion against order, against structure, against God's sovereign rule. The book of Job mentions Rahab. By his power he stilled the sea. By his understanding he shattered Rahab. The Psalms speak of it too. You crushed Rahab like a carcass. You scattered your enemies with your mighty arm. Rahab represents something primal. The threat that chaos will return. That the waters will rise again and cover everything. That the boundaries God established, between sea and land, between the deep and the sky, will collapse and everything will dissolve back into formless void. But Rahab also becomes, in prophetic imagery, a symbol for arrogant nations. Particularly Egypt. Egypt with its Nile, its dependence on water, its proud claim to be the source of its own prosperity. I made myself, Pharaoh claims in Ezekiel. The ultimate arrogance, denying that God is the source of order and claiming to be self-made, self-sustaining. So Rahab blends together mythic chaos monster and historical empire, both representing the same thing. The proud refusal to acknowledge divine sovereignty. The attempt to stand independent, to claim autonomy, to resist the order that God establishes. And in both cases, mythic and historical. Rahab is defeated, crushed, scattered. The sea monster is slain. The proud empire is brought low. God's power over chaos, over the deep, over every force that would resist divine order. That power is absolute. But Rahab isn't the only chaos monster in biblical tradition. There's a whole bestiary of them. 3 in particular stand out, a triad of creatures representing chaos across every realm of creation. Leviathan, the sea monster, the twisted serpent of the deep. Job describes it in elaborate, terrifying detail. Its scales are impenetrable. Its breath kindles coals. Fire goes out from its mouth. It makes the depths boil like a pot. No weapon can pierce it. No power on earth can tame it. It is the king over all proud beasts. Leviathan represents the chaos of the sea, the untamable ocean, the depths that can swallow ships and drown sailors and resist all human attempts to control them. The sea, in ancient Near Eastern thought, was fundamentally chaotic. It had to be held back constantly or it would flood the world again as it did in Noah's day. Then there's Behemoth, the land monster, also described in Job, right before Leviathan. Behold, Behemoth, which I made as I made you, enormous, with bones like bars of iron, eating grass like an ox but with power beyond any natural animal. Some imagine a hippopotamus, others an elephant, but the description seems to exceed any known creature. Its tail sways like a cedar. It is the first of God's works. Behemoth represents the chaos of the land, the untamed wilderness, the raw power of creation that exists outside human control, the beasts that could trample cities, the wild places where humans dare not go, the reminder that we only inhabit a small, cultivated portion of creation while vast reaches remain wild and dangerous. And then, Ziz. Lesser known than the other two, but equally important in the triad. Ziz is the chaos monster of the sky, the enormous bird whose wings can block out the sun. In rabbinic tradition, Ziz completes the set. Leviathan in the sea, Behemoth on the land, Ziz in the air. Together they represent primeval chaos across all 3 realms of creation. The sky, like the sea, was seen as chaotic. Storms came from there. Lightning, thunder, violent winds that could destroy crops and homes. The sky was the realm of the unpredictable, the uncontrollable. And Ziz, the great bird, represented that aerial chaos. These 3 creatures, they're described as primordial, made at the very beginning, either during creation itself or shortly after, representing the raw, untamed power of the natural world. They exist at the edges, at the boundaries of the ordered space where humans live. They remind us that chaos hasn't been destroyed. It's been contained, subdued, held at bay, but it still exists. And here's what's fascinating about these monsters in Jewish tradition. They're destined for defeat, but also for something else. For consumption. There's a tradition that at the end of days, at the great messianic banquet, God will slay Leviathan, Behemoth, and Ziz, and their flesh will be served as food for the righteous. The chaos monsters, eaten, consumed, transformed from threats into nourishment. Their power, which once inspired terror, now becomes sustenance. It's a vivid image of complete victory, not just defeating chaos, but incorporating it, digesting it, making it serve the purposes of the redeemed world. Until that day, they wait. They represent the forces that God holds in check. When God speaks to Job from the whirlwind, he points to Leviathan and Behemoth. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook? Can you tame Behemoth? No. No human can. But God can. God made them. God knows them. God maintains power over them. They serve, in their way, as proof of God's sovereignty. If God can create and control these representations of chaos, if God can keep Leviathan in the sea and Behemoth in the wilderness and Ziz in the sky, all of them contained within their boundaries, then no chaos is beyond God's power. Rahab is crushed. Leviathan is on a hook, whether it knows it or not. Behemoth grazes where God permits. Ziz flies in skies that God commands. The deep is divided and given boundaries. The waters know their place. This is the ongoing work of creation. Not something that happened once and is finished, but something continuous. Every moment, God maintains order against the pressure of chaos. Every moment, the boundaries hold because God maintains them. The monsters remain contained because God contains them. And one day, those monsters will be slain. The chaos they represent will be finally and fully defeated. And in that day, the righteous will feast on their flesh, will celebrate the complete victory of order over chaos, of creation over void, of God's sovereign power over every force that ever threatened to unmake the world. Until then, the monsters swim in the deep. They lumber through the wilderness. They soar through stormy skies. Reminders of chaos. Proof of sovereignty. Destined for defeat, and ultimately, for the table of the redeemed. Beasts as empires and powers. We've spoken of chaos monsters, of Leviathan and Behemoth and Rahab, creatures that represent the raw, untamed forces of nature held in check by divine power. But in the visions of the prophets, particularly in Daniel and Revelation, something shifts. The beasts take on a different meaning. They become symbols not just of natural chaos, but of political power, of empires, of human kingdoms that embody the chaos and violence of the monsters themselves. The prophet Daniel has a vision. He stands by the sea, and he watches. 4 winds churn the great waters, stirring them into turbulence. And from that churning sea, beasts rise. 4 of them, one after another. But these are not ordinary animals. They are hybrid creatures, impossible combinations, monstrous forms that violate the natural categories of creation. The first is like a lion, but it has eagle's wings. As Daniel watches, the wings are plucked off. It's given a human heart. The second is like a bear, raised up on one side, with 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. A voice tells it, "Arise, devour much flesh." The third is like a leopard, but with 4 wings of a bird on its back and 4 heads. And the fourth defies easy description. It's terrifying, dreadful, exceedingly strong. It has great iron teeth. It devours and breaks in pieces and stamps what remains with its feet. And it has 10 horns. These beasts, Daniel is told, represent kingdoms, empires that will rise and fall, earthly powers that, for a time, dominate the world. But notice where they come from. They rise from the sea, from the chaotic waters. From the same place the chaos monsters dwell. This is the prophetic insight. Human empires, in their violence and pride, in their tendency to devour and crush and destroy, are themselves manifestations of chaos. They emerge from the same primordial disorder that Leviathan represents. They are political chaos monsters. Each one is a hybrid, a mixture of different animal traits, because they violate natural order. They conquer nations that should remain distinct. They crush peoples under their power. They create artificial unity through force, blending together what should remain separate, creating unnatural combinations held together only by violence. But there's more. As Daniel watches the 4th beast, the most terrifying one, he sees something else emerge. A little horn. It comes up among the 10 horns, and 3 of the first horns are plucked up by the roots to make room for it. And this little horn, it has eyes. Human eyes, and a mouth speaking great things, speaking boastfully, speaking, later we're told, against the Most High, wearing out the saints, attempting to change times and laws. Think about how strange this is. A horn, a body part of a beast, but it has eyes and a mouth. It speaks. It has personality, agency, ambition. It's not quite a separate creature, But it's more than just part of the beast. It's a hybrid within a hybrid. A symbol becoming monstrous in its own right. This little horn represents something specific. A ruler. A king. A person of blasphemous ambition who arises from within an empire and takes power. But by presenting him as a horn with eyes and a mouth, the vision shows us something profound. He's not separate from the empire. He's an outgrowth of it. The beast produces him. The political chaos monster generates this speaking, seeing, ambitious extension of itself. Empires don't just oppress from a distance. They produce rulers who embody their chaotic violence, who speak their pride, who see with human eyes but exercise bestial power. The little horn is the beast focused into a single person. The chaos of empire concentrated in one ambitious, blasphemous will. This pattern of beasts representing political powers. It reaches its full development in the book of Revelation. John stands on the seashore, just as Daniel stood by the waters. And he sees a beast rising from the sea. But this beast, this one combines everything. It has 7 heads, 10 horns. On its heads are blasphemous names. It looks like a leopard, but its feet are like a bear's, and its mouth is like a lion's mouth. This beast is a fusion of all of Daniel's beasts. It represents not just one empire, but the pattern of empire itself. All empires. All violent, proud, chaotic political power concentrated into one symbol. And it's given authority. A dragon, explicitly identified as Satan, the ancient serpent, gives the beast its power and throne and great authority. The chaos monster of political power is energized by cosmic evil itself. The political and the spiritual merge. Earthly empires are revealed as manifestations of spiritual rebellion against God. One of the beast's heads appears to have a fatal wound, but the wound is healed. And the whole world marvels and follows the beast. They worship the dragon who gave authority to the beast. They worship the beast itself. Who is like the beast? They cry. Who can fight against it? This is the seductive power of empire. Its violence becomes inspiring. Its strength becomes worthy of worship. People give their allegiance not to God but to political power, to military might, to the beast that can devour and stamp and break in pieces. The beast is given a mouth, just like Daniel's little horn, speaking proud words and blasphemies. It opens its mouth to blaspheme God, to blaspheme His name and His dwelling. It makes war on the saints and conquers them. It's given authority over every tribe and people and language and nation. But then, another beast rises. This one comes not from the sea but from the earth. It has 2 horns like a lamb, gentle, harmless looking, but it speaks like a dragon. Its voice betrays its nature. It looks like a lamb, but its words are serpentine. This second beast exercises all the authority of the first beast. It makes the earth worship the first beast. It performs great signs. It deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image of the beast. And it gives breath to this image so that the image can even speak. Here's what this represents: false religion, deceptive spirituality, power that presents itself as gentle and holy, lamb's horns, but serves the purposes of the dragon and the beast. It takes the authority of violent empire and clothes it in religious legitimacy. It makes people worship political power, makes them create images of it, makes them bow before it. The lamb-like appearance is the deception. True power looks like a lamb, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. But this beast only mimics that appearance. Its words, its dragon speech, reveal the truth. It serves chaos. It serves the sea beast. It serves the serpent. Together, these beasts show us something profound about political and spiritual evil. They work together. The sea beast of violent empire and the earth beast of false religion. Political power and corrupted spirituality. Military might and deceptive worship. They feed each other. They legitimize each other. They create a system where chaos is worshipped as order, where violence is celebrated as strength, where rebellion against God is dressed up as religious devotion. The 7 heads of the beast. They represent multiple things. 7 kings. 7 mountains. 7 manifestations of empire throughout history. The beast isn't just one nation. It's the pattern that repeats. Empire after empire rising from the chaotic sea, devouring and stamping, speaking blasphemies, demanding worship. And across history, the little horns emerge. The rulers with eyes and mouths. The blasphemous personalities who concentrate the empire's chaos into their own persons. They rise. They speak great things. They wear out the saints. They attempt to change times and laws. They demand allegiance that belongs to God alone. But Daniel sees the end of his vision. The Ancient of Days takes his seat. The court sits in judgment. The beast is slain. Its body is destroyed and given over to be burned. The little horn's words are heard, and then the horn is silenced. The kingdoms are given to the people of the Most High. John sees something similar. The beast and the false prophet, the sea beast and the earth beast, they're captured. They're thrown alive into the lake of fire. The dragon, the ancient serpent, is bound and then ultimately destroyed. The chaos monsters of political power, they rise. They terrify. They devour. They demand worship. But they're temporary. Their authority is permitted for a time, but only for a time. The sea that birthed them will one day give up its dead. The beasts will be judged. The empires will fall. Until then, they rise from the churning waters. They display their hybrid impossibilities. They speak with dragon voices through lamb-like appearances. They seduce the world into worship of power rather than submission to God. But those who have eyes to see, who recognize the beasts for what they are, they don't marvel. They don't worship. They endure. They wait. They know that every empire, no matter how strong, no matter how permanent it seems, is just another beast rising from the sea. And every beast meets the same end. Judged. Defeated. Consigned to destruction. While the kingdom of God, the stone cut without hands that strikes the statue and becomes a mountain filling the earth, that kingdom endures forever. Order triumphs over chaos. The Creator's authority supersedes every created power. The beasts fall. The throne remains. This is the promise. This is the pattern. From Daniel's shore to John's island, the vision is the same. Beasts rise. God judges. The faithful endure. And in the end, the sea that birthed the monsters is no more. Named demonic powers. We've spoken of demons as the disembodied spirits of the giants, wandering, hostile remnants of the antediluvian chaos. But in the biblical and apocryphal traditions, something else emerges. Specific demons. Named powers. Entities with distinct identities, roles, and spheres of influence. Not just anonymous evil spirits, but personalities, beings with names that have echoed through millennia of tradition and fear. One of the earliest of these names appears in Leviticus, in the instructions for the Day of Atonement. 2 goats are brought before the high priest. One is sacrificed to the Lord. The other is for Azazel. The high priest lays his hands on this goat's head and confesses over it all the sins of Israel. Then the goat is sent away into the wilderness, to Azazel. It carries the sins of the people away from the camp, away from the community, out into the barren places. In the Hebrew text, the meaning isn't entirely clear. Is Azazel a place? A concept? The phrase could mean the goat that departs, or complete removal. But later tradition, particularly the Book of Enoch, understood Azazel as something else entirely. As someone. A fallen angel. One of the leaders of the Watchers who descended to corrupt humanity. According to Enoch, Azazel was the one who taught humans to make weapons of war. Swords. Knives. Shields. Armor. He taught the art of metallurgy for violent purposes. He also taught cosmetics, how women could enhance their appearance, a teaching seen as contributing to the seduction and corruption that characterized the pre-flood world. The ritual suddenly takes on deeper meaning. The sins of Israel aren't just being symbolically removed. They're being returned to their source. Sent back to Azazel, the one blamed for introducing sin and corruption in the first place. The goat becomes a reversal. Humanity sending back to the demonic realm the evil that came from there originally. Azazel, in this understanding, isn't just wandering chaos. He's a named power. A specific fallen angel bound in the wilderness, in the desert places, receiving the scapegoat each year as a reminder of his role in corrupting creation. He evolved from a ritual symbol into a personality, a demonic figure responsible for specific kinds of sin and corruption. But Azazel isn't the only named demon in ancient Jewish literature. The Book of Tobit introduces us to another, Asmodeus. And his story is remarkably personal, remarkably concrete. A young woman named Sarah is tormented by this demon. She's been married 7 times, and on each wedding night, before the marriage can be consummated, Asmodeus kills her husband. 7 times this happens. 7 dead husbands. The demon claims her, in a sense, preventing her from having a normal life, a normal marriage. This isn't cosmic rebellion or the corruption of nations. This is intimate evil. Personal torment. A demon fixating on one person, ruining her life, driving her to despair. Sarah prays for death because she cannot bear the shame and sorrow anymore. Enter Tobias, guided by the angel Raphael in disguise. Raphael gives specific instructions. Take a fish, use its heart and liver, burn them as incense in the bridal chamber. The smoke will drive Asmodeus away. And it works. The ritual is performed. The demon smells the smoke and flees to the remotest parts of Egypt, where Raphael binds him. Sarah is freed. The marriage is consummated without death. Normal life becomes possible again. This story shows us something important about how ancient people understood demons. They weren't just abstract forces. They could fixate on individuals. They could have preferences, obsessions, patterns of behavior. Asmodeus wanted Sarah, or wanted to prevent her from having a normal life. He was thwarted not by overwhelming divine power simply obliterating him, but by specific ritual, by knowing what repelled him, by angelic intervention that bound him in a far place. Later tradition would expand Asmodeus's role. He becomes, in some texts, a king of demons, a powerful figure in the demonic hierarchy. But his appearance in Tobit is more humble, more local, a demon that can be driven away by the smoke of burning fish organs if you know the right technique. This is early demonology. The beginning of understanding demons not as a mass of identical evil spirits, but as distinct entities with names, personalities, vulnerabilities, and spheres of influence. The Book of Revelation introduces another named power. Abaddon in Hebrew, Apollyon in Greek. Both names mean the same thing. Destroyer. John sees a star fallen from heaven to earth. This fallen star is given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit, the abyss. He opens it, and smoke pours out like the smoke of a great furnace. The sun and air are darkened by the smoke. And from the smoke come locusts, but not ordinary locusts. Locusts with power like scorpions, with faces like human faces, hair like women's hair, teeth like lions' teeth, breastplates like iron, wings that sound like many chariots rushing into battle. They're commanded not to harm the grass or trees or plants, only people. And only those people who don't have the seal of God on their foreheads. They're not to kill, but to torment. For 5 months, they torment. And the torment is like the sting of a scorpion. People will seek death during those days but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. And over these locust scorpion creatures, there is a king, the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon. In Greek, Apollyon, the destroyer. This isn't a demon that possesses people or causes specific sins. This is destruction personified. A being whose very nature is to unmake, to torment, to break down, to cause suffering. He rules over the abyss, the pit, the deep places where chaos and destruction dwell. And when he's released, even partially, even temporarily, the result is widespread torment. Abaddon appears earlier in the biblical text, usually paired with death or Sheol. Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied. It's presented as a place, the realm of destruction. But in Revelation, it's also a person, a ruler, an angel of destruction who commands tormenting creatures from the pit. This is the nature of demonic powers in apocalyptic literature. They're not just evil. They're functional. They have roles. They rule over domains. Abaddon rules the abyss. He personifies destruction itself. When his realm is opened, destruction pours out. But there's another title, another way of describing demonic authority, that's both more pervasive and more subtle. In the letter to the Ephesians, Paul writes about the spiritual forces arrayed against believers. He mentions the prince of the power of the air, the spirit now at work in the sons of disobedience. The air, not the underworld, not the abyss or the pit or the depths. The air, the atmosphere, the space we move through constantly, the unseen realm that surrounds us. This is a different kind of evil authority, not bound in a pit, not confined to the wilderness, but operating in the atmosphere itself, in the space between heaven and earth, in the realm humans inhabit without realizing it's inhabited by other beings as well. The Prince of the Power of the Air. It's a title, not a name, but it conveys immense authority. A ruler over the unseen realm. A power that operates in the air, in communication, in thought, in the invisible influences that shape human behavior and society. Later tradition would often identify this prince as Satan himself, or as one of his chief lieutenants. But the key insight is the location. Evil isn't just below, in the pit, in the abyss. It's also around, in the air, in the atmosphere, in the space we breathe and move through. This means spiritual warfare isn't just about the dramatic, the possessed, the obviously demonic. It's about the ambient, the cultural, the atmospheric influences that shape thinking and behavior without people realizing it. The Prince of the Air works through the air, through what's broadcast, communicated, spread invisibly from mind to mind. These named powers, Azazel in the wilderness, Asmodeus tormenting individuals, Abaddon ruling the abyss, the Prince of the Air governing the atmosphere. They show us a cosmos where evil is organized. Not random. Not chaotic in the sense of being unstructured. There are hierarchies. There are spheres of influence. There are demons with specific roles and authorities and territories. Some are bound. Some are free. Some work openly. Some work subtly. Some destroy with obvious violence. Some corrupt with invisible influence. And each one has a name, or a title, or a designation. They're not anonymous. They're known. And in being known, in being named, they become something humans can confront, can resist, can understand, at least partially. The scapegoat goes to Azazel, confronting the source of corruption with the sins he helped introduce. The smoke drives away Asmodeus, using ritual knowledge to counter demonic obsession. The sealed are protected from Abaddon's locusts, divine marking preserving them from destruction. Believers stand against the Prince of the Air, aware of the atmospheric battle, able to resist invisible influences. Naming is power. Knowing the enemy is the beginning of resistance. These aren't just demons. They're Azazel, Asmodeus, Abaddon, the Prince of the Air. Each name carries meaning. Each title indicates a sphere of operation. Each designation helps us understand how evil works, and therefore how it can be opposed. The cosmic order we spoke of earlier, it has its dark mirror, a demonic hierarchy, named powers ruling over specific domains of chaos and destruction. And the spiritual battle isn't just between generic good and evil. It's between specific authorities, named powers, known enemies. Azazel waits in the wilderness. Asmodeus was bound in Egypt. Abaddon rules the abyss. The prince commands the air. And believers, those who are sealed, who are guided by angels, who know the rituals and the prayers and the names, they navigate this world of named powers, resisting, enduring, protected by a power greater than any demon, no matter how ancient their name or how vast their domain. The underworld and judgment. Death is not the end in biblical cosmology. That much is clear. But what comes after death? That's more complicated, more shadowy, more uncertain than simple categories of heaven and hell would suggest. The ancient Israelites spoke of Sheol, a word that appears again and again in Scripture, sometimes translated as the grave, sometimes as the pit, sometimes simply left as Sheol because no English word quite captures what it means. Sheol is the underworld, the realm of the dead. But it's not a place of fire and torment. Not yet, not in the earlier texts. It's something else. Something quieter. More melancholy. A place of shadows and silence and diminishment. When someone dies, they go down to Sheol. Down. Always down. Beneath the earth. Beneath the land of the living. Into the depths where the dead gather. And what are they like there, the dead in Sheol? They're called shades. Shadows of their former selves. The Hebrew word is Rephaim, which can mean weak ones, shadows, ghosts. They exist, but in a diminished state. They're not fully alive, but they're not completely obliterated either. They continue, but barely. Like echoes. Like fading memories of who they once were. The Psalms speak of Sheol as a place of silence. The dead do not praise the Lord, nor do any who go down into silence. There's no worship there. No song. No joy. It's described as a place where God is not remembered, where praise ceases, where the vibrancy of life gives way to a kind of gray existence. In the book of Job, Sheol is described as a land of darkness and deep shadow. A land of gloom like thick darkness, like deep shadow without any order, where light is as thick darkness. It's a place where distinctions collapse, where the small and great are there, and the slave is freed from his master. Not freed in the sense of liberation and joy, but freed in the sense that nothing matters anymore. All hierarchies flatten in the democracy of death. Even the mighty are brought low in Sheol. Even monsters. Even the proud kings and powerful rulers who once shook the earth. Isaiah has a vision of the king of Babylon descending to Sheol. The shades beneath are stirred up to meet him. They rise from their thrones, these former kings, these dead rulers. And they taunt him. You too have become as weak as we. You have become like us. The one who once terrified nations, who conquered kingdoms, who was adorned with splendor. Now he's just another shade in the pit. His pomp is brought down to Sheol, along with the sound of his harps. Maggots are the bed beneath him, and worms are his covering. This is the leveling power of Sheol. It takes the highest and brings them to the lowest. It takes the strong and makes them weak. It takes the living and reduces them to shadows. Everyone goes there, righteous and wicked, rich and poor, powerful and powerless. It's the common destination. The place where all human distinction ultimately collapses into shared diminishment. But Sheol isn't only about the dead continuing in shadow. It's also about waiting. Because judgment is coming. The dead in Sheol are not yet judged. Not finally, not fully. They're in a kind of holding state. Waiting for something more final. Something more decisive. And that judgment, when it comes, it's portrayed in the most bureaucratic terms imaginable. Books. Records. Cosmic accounting. The book of Daniel speaks of this. The Ancient of Days takes his seat. Thousands upon thousands attend him. 10,000 times 10,000 stand before him. The court sits in judgment. And the books are opened. Books. Plural. Multiple volumes of cosmic record-keeping. Everything written down. Every deed, every word, every thought, recorded by celestial scribes, preserved in heavenly archives, ready to be opened when judgment comes. The Psalms mention this too. You have kept count of my tossings. Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? God keeps records. Detailed, meticulous records. Even tears are counted. Even the nights of restless tossing are noted. Nothing escapes the divine accounting. Revelation expands this imagery even further. John sees the dead standing before a great white throne. Books are opened. But also, another book. The book of life. And the dead are judged by what is written in the books, according to what they had done. Anyone whose name is not found written in the book of life is thrown into the lake of fire. So there are two types of books. The books of deeds, the records of everything done. And the book of life, the registry of those who belong to God, whose names are written down, who are preserved for life rather than death. This is judgment as cosmic bureaucracy, as celestial record-keeping. Every action generates a record. Every life produces a file. And at the end, the books are opened. The records are reviewed. The accounting is done. Who keeps these records? The texts hint at celestial scribes, angels whose task is to observe and record. We mentioned Metatron earlier. In later Jewish mysticism, he's described as the keeper of the heavenly archives, the celestial scribe who records everything that happens in creation. Every deed of every being, human and angelic, written down in books that will one day be opened. This is a far cry from Sheol's shadowy silence. This is precise, detailed, exact, nothing forgotten, nothing overlooked. Every moment of every life preserved in permanent record. Think about what this means. It means history matters. Actions have permanent consequences. What seems forgotten on earth is remembered in heaven. What seems to disappear is actually recorded. The books don't forget. It also means judgment isn't arbitrary. It's based on evidence, on records, on what actually happened, not on rumor or appearance or selective memory. The books contain the truth, complete and unvarnished. But here's what's interesting about the biblical portrayal of these concepts. Sheol and the judgment with the books. They don't quite fit together seamlessly. Sheol is from the older texts, the Psalms, the wisdom literature, the prophets. It's a place everyone goes. A shadowy underworld where the dead wait in diminished form. The judgment scene with the books, that's from later texts. From Daniel, from Revelation, from the apocalyptic literature. It envisions a future event. A moment when the dead will rise, when the books will be opened, when final judgment will be pronounced. Between these two ideas, between Sheol as the current state of the dead and judgment as their future destiny, there's a gap, a space. And in later Jewish and Christian theology, that space gets filled in. Sheol becomes divided. There are compartments, sections, places for the righteous and places for the wicked, both waiting but in different conditions for the final judgment. But in the older texts, that's not clearly articulated. There's just Sheol, the pit, the grave, the shadowy underworld, and the promise that someday, somehow, judgment will come. The books will be opened. The dead will rise. The accounting will be done. Until then, the dead gather in Sheol. They exist in shadow. They wait in silence. Even the greatest, even the monsters, the proud kings, the mighty warriors, they're brought low. They become shades like everyone else. They discover that all their power, all their glory, all their achievements couldn't prevent them from going down to the pit. And above them, or perhaps we should say outside them, outside time as the dead experience it, the celestial scribes keep writing, recording, filling the books with the deeds of the living. Every generation adding to the archives. Every life contributing its chapter to the cosmic records. The books grow. The records accumulate. And one day, the Ancient of Days will take his seat. The court will convene. The books will be opened. And everything written there, every deed, every word, every tear, every secret thing, will be reviewed. This is the biblical vision of death and judgment. Not simple. Not immediate, but structured across time. The dead go to Sheol, they wait in shadow, and while they wait, the records are being kept. The books are being written. The accounting continues. Until the day when waiting ends. When the books are finished. When the final entries are made. When judgment arrives not as a surprise, not as arbitrary divine whim, but as the inevitable conclusion of a process that's been unfolding all along. The dead will rise from Sheol. The books will be opened. The names will be read. And each person, from the greatest to the least, from the ancient kings in the pit to the most recent arrivals, will hear what has been recorded. Will learn what has been remembered. Will discover that nothing was lost, nothing forgotten, nothing erased from the cosmic ledgers. Sheol is the waiting room. The books are the records. And judgment. Judgment is when the waiting ends and the records are read and the final accounting reveals what has been true all along. The shadows wait. The scribes write. The books fill. And the throne, the great white throne before which all will stand, it waits too. Prepared for the day when the cosmic court will sit, when the archives will be opened, when every life will be weighed in the balances of divine justice, measured against the records that never forget. Creatures of the wilderness and ruins. There are places in the world where order has broken down. Where cities once stood, now there are only broken stones. Where civilization once flourished, now there is only silence and emptiness. These are the ruins, the wastelands, the places humans have abandoned. And in the biblical imagination, these places are not empty. They cannot be empty, because where human order retreats, something else moves in. The wilderness reclaims what was once tamed, and with the wilderness come its inhabitants, creatures that dwell in the spaces between civilization and chaos. The prophet Isaiah speaks of the judgment against Babylon. That great city, that symbol of human pride and power, will be brought low. And when it falls, when its towers crumble and its walls collapse, what will inhabit it then? Wild animals will lie down there, Isaiah says. Their houses will be full of howling creatures. Their ostriches will dwell, and their wild goats will dance. Wild goats. In Hebrew, the word is thyrim, which literally means hairy ones. But it's often translated as satyrs, goat demons, creatures that are part animal, part something else, part natural, part supernatural. These aren't ordinary goats. The text suggests something more. Creatures that dance in the ruins, that inhabit the spaces where humans no longer dwell, that represent the return of chaos to what was once ordered. The same language appears in Isaiah's oracle against Edom. The land will become burning pitch. Night and day it will not be quenched. From generation to generation it will lie waste. None will pass through it forever and ever. And what will live there? The hawk and the porcupine, the owl and the raven. Thorns will grow in its palaces, nettles and thistles in its fortresses. It will be a haunt for jackals, a home for ostriches. And wild goats will call to each other there. Seirim calling to each other. These hairy ones, these goat creatures, communicating across the wasteland, inhabiting the ruins, making their homes in what was once the seat of human power. This is the biblical vision of what happens when civilization falls. The ruins don't remain empty. They become home to creatures that exist at the boundary between the natural and the supernatural, between the animal kingdom and the demonic realm. Some translations try to naturalize this. They make this just ordinary goats, wild animals that would naturally move into abandoned spaces. But the context suggests something more unsettling. These are creatures associated with wilderness in its spiritual sense, with the places outside human control, with the realm that resists order. Remember that Azazel, that fallen angel we discussed earlier, he dwells in the wilderness. The scapegoat is sent to him in the desert places. The wilderness is not just geographically distant from civilization. It's spiritually distinct. It's where the demonic has greater freedom, where chaos lingers closer to the surface. So when cities fall and become wilderness again, when the ruins are reclaimed by the wild, these goat demons dance there. They call to each other. They mark the territory as belonging once again to chaos, to the untamed, to the forces that human civilization temporarily pushed back but could never fully defeat. The prophet speaks of other creatures too. Lilith, often translated as night creature or screech owl, but in later Jewish tradition understood as Lilith, a female demon associated with the night and with desolation. She finds rest in the ruins. She makes her home where humans once lived. Jackals howl in the former palaces. Ostriches make their nests in what were once gardens. The owl and the raven inhabit the broken towers. And among all these natural creatures, these goat demons, these spirits of desolation. This is prophetic imagery, yes. But it's also a kind of mythology blended with ecology. The prophets understood that when humans abandon a place, nature returns. Animals move in. But they also understood that there's a spiritual dimension to this. That ruins are liminal spaces. That they exist between the ordered and the chaotic. And in those between spaces, the boundary creatures dwell. But the biblical cosmology doesn't leave nature entirely to these chaotic spirits. Because even the natural forces, even the wind and the weather, even the elements themselves, they have their angelic overseers. They're divine governors who ensure that chaos doesn't completely overwhelm creation. The book of Revelation mentions this explicitly. John sees 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds so that no wind would blow on earth or sea or against any tree. These are angels with authority over the winds. They can restrain them. They can release them. The winds don't blow randomly. They're governed. Another angel appears, ascending from the rising of the sun, with the seal of the living God. He calls to the 4 angels who have been given power to harm earth and sea. The winds are not just neutral forces. They have the potential to harm. But they're held in check by angelic authority. Later in Revelation, an angel appears who has authority over fire. Another has authority over the waters. The natural elements, fire, water, air, they're not impersonal forces operating according to pure natural law. They have angelic governors, beings assigned to oversee them, to direct them, to ensure they serve the purposes of divine order rather than reverting to chaos. This is a profound vision of how the cosmos operates. Even nature, even the seemingly random and impersonal forces of weather and elements, they're part of the ordered hierarchy we discussed at the beginning. Angels govern them. Spirits oversee them. Nothing is truly wild in the sense of being outside divine control. The winds blow where angels permit them to blow. Fire burns where angelic authority allows it to burn. Waters rise and fall under spiritual oversight. The natural world is, in this understanding, thoroughly spiritualized. Every element has its angelic guardian. Every force has its overseer. This is why when God speaks to Job from the whirlwind, he asks, "Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or have you seen the storehouses of the hail?" There are storehouses, places where these forces are kept, and by implication, beings who manage those storehouses, who release the snow and the hail at appointed times for appointed purposes. Can you send forth lightnings? God asks. Do they report to you? The lightnings have agency. They can report. They're not just electrical discharges. They're something more. Governed forces. Directed powers. Part of the cosmic bureaucracy of angels overseeing elements. So here's the picture we get. The wilderness, the ruins, the abandoned spaces, they're inhabited by boundary creatures. By goat demons and night spirits. By beings that represent the chaotic aspect of creation. They dance in the ruins. They call to each other across the wasteland. They mark the places where human order has failed, where civilization has crumbled, where chaos has reasserted itself. But even there, even in those wild places, the forces of nature are not completely chaotic. The winds that blow through the ruins are overseen by angels. The storms that batter the wasteland are governed by spiritual authorities. The very elements that the wilderness creatures inhabit, those elements themselves are under divine control. It's a tension, a balance. The ruins are real. The chaos is real. The goat demons really do dance there. But they dance within limits. The wilderness is truly wild. But it's not outside the cosmic order. It's part of it. The untamed edge of it. The boundary where order meets chaos. But even there, even at that edge, angelic overseers ensure that chaos doesn't consume everything. When a city falls, when Babylon crumbles or Edom becomes desolate, it's not just a political or military defeat. It's a spiritual event. Human order retreats. The creatures of chaos move in. The Sirim dance in the ruins. The night spirits find rest there. The howling things and the desolate creatures make their homes in what was once the pride of human civilization. But the winds that blow through those ruins, they're held by angels. The fires that might consume the rubble, they're governed by spiritual authorities. the waters that might flood the wasteland. They're overseen by celestial powers. This is the biblical vision of wilderness and ruins. They're places of chaos, yes. They're inhabited by boundary creatures, by goat demons and spirits of desolation. But they're not outside the cosmic order. They're the edge of it, the fringe. The places where the tension between order and chaos is most visible, most tangible. And even there, especially there, the angels maintain their watch. The overseers continue their work. The elements remain governed. The winds are held back until it's time to release them. The forces of nature serve the purposes of divine order, even when they blow through the ruins where the goat demons dance. The wilderness is wild, but it's not ungoverned. The ruins are chaotic, but they're not outside control. Everything, from the heights of heaven to the depths of Sheol, from the ordered cities to the desolate wastelands, everything exists within the vast cosmic structure where angels oversee elements, where spirits inhabit appropriate realms, where even chaos serves, in its way, the purposes of divine order. The Cherubim call to each other in the ruins. The angels restrain the winds. And between these two realities, between chaos and order, between the wild and the governed, the world continues. Balanced, tense, held together by spiritual forces that most never see but that operate constantly, maintaining the structure even at its most vulnerable edges. Translation choices that created monsters. Here's something fascinating about the creatures we've been discussing. Some of them, perhaps more than we realize, exist not because the original Hebrew text clearly described them, but because translators, working centuries or even millennia ago, made choices. Interpretive choices. Creative choices. Choices that transformed the text in ways the original authors might never have imagined. Language is always an act of interpretation. When you translate from one language to another, you're not just swapping words. You're making decisions about meaning, about connotation, about how to convey in your language and culture what was expressed in a very different language and culture. And when those translators were working with ancient Hebrew, a language that sometimes used rare words, ambiguous terms, poetic imagery, they had to make choices. What did this word mean? What creature was being described? And sometimes, they reached for the most dramatic, most vivid option available to them. Take the word tannin. In Hebrew, it appears in various biblical texts. It can mean a large serpent, a sea creature, something big and reptilian. In Genesis, God creates the great tannin, the great sea creatures. In Exodus, Aaron's staff becomes a tannin when thrown down before Pharaoh. The word is flexible, context-dependent. Sometimes it clearly means a crocodile or a large snake. Sometimes it seems to refer to mythological chaos creatures like Leviathan. Sometimes it's more ambiguous. But when ancient translators, particularly those working on the Greek Septuagint and later the Latin Vulgate, when they encountered tannin, they often reached for a word that carried more mythological weight in their own cultures. They translated it as dragon, Draco in Latin, Draken in Greek. And suddenly, the biblical text is populated with dragons. Not just large serpents or crocodiles or sea monsters in a generic sense, but dragons, with all the cultural baggage that word carries. The legendary creatures of Greek and Roman mythology. The fearsome beasts of medieval imagination. The English translators, working from these earlier versions, continued the tradition. The King James Version speaks of dragons. Dragons in the wilderness. Dragons in the sea. Pharaoh as a great dragon lying in the midst of his rivers. And readers, for centuries, imagined actual dragons. Fire-breathing, perhaps. Winged, certainly in later imagination. Monstrous creatures of legend and myth, not just large reptiles or poetic symbols of chaos. The text took on a life of its own. The translation choices created monsters that, while not entirely absent from the original Hebrew imagery, were certainly amplified, made more explicitly monstrous, through the translation process. The same thing happened with venomous snakes. Isaiah mentions a creature called Tsifa or Tsophoni, a venomous serpent. Deadly, certainly. Feared, absolutely. In one passage, it's described as a flying serpent, probably referring to the way some snakes can launch themselves through the air when striking, or possibly to a poetic description of swiftness and danger. But translators, they looked at flying serpent and reached for legendary creatures from their own traditions. The Septuagint and Vulgate sometimes rendered these as basilisks. The basilisk, in Greco-Roman tradition, this was a legendary reptile. Small, sometimes, but deadly beyond measure. Its gaze could kill. Its breath was poison. It was the king of serpents, wearing a crown-like marking on its head. Later medieval translators and interpreters went even further. They created the cockatrice, a creature born from a rooster's egg hatched by a serpent. A hybrid monster with a rooster's head and a serpent's body. Its glance could turn you to stone. Its very existence was an abomination against nature. And the biblical text, speaking of dangerous snakes, of vipers, of venomous serpents found in the wilderness, now appeared to be describing these legendary death-glance creatures. These impossibly deadly monsters from medieval bestiaries. Isaiah's prophecy about the peaceful kingdom, where the weaned child shall put his hand on the cockatrice's den, it took on a more miraculous quality. Not just taming ordinary danger, but rendering harmless a creature whose very nature was legendary deadliness. A monster subdued by the peace of the Messianic age. The translation created the monster. Or at least, it transformed a real but dangerous animal into something far more legendary and mythological. Perhaps the most famous example is the unicorn. The King James Bible mentions unicorns multiple times. They're strong. They're wild. They cannot be tamed for agricultural work. God asks Job, "Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee, or abide by thy crib? Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow?" For centuries, English readers imagined unicorns in the Bible. The legendary horse with a single spiral horn. The creature of medieval tapestries and royal heraldry. Pure. Magical. Able to be tamed only by a virgin. That unicorn. But the Hebrew word is reem. And reem almost certainly refers to the aurochs. A wild ox. Enormous. Powerful. With great horns. Probably the ancient translators saw one horn in profile or in poetic imagery and thought of single-horned creatures. The aurochs was a real animal. It lived in the ancient Near East. It was fierce and untamable. Bulls of tremendous size and strength. They went extinct in the early modern period. The last known aurochs died in Poland in 1627. But in biblical times, they were known, feared, respected for their power and wildness. The ancient Greek translators of the Septuagint encountered reem and translated it as monokeros, one-horned. They were probably thinking of the rhinoceros, which was known in the ancient world, or perhaps working from descriptions or artistic representations that emphasized a single prominent horn. From there, the Latin translators used unicornis, one horn. And medieval European translators and readers, not familiar with aurochs or rhinoceroses, imagined the unicorn of their own legends. The white horse with the spiral horn. The creature of impossibility and magic. So the Bible appeared to confirm the existence of unicorns. It appeared to place them in the same category as real animals like lions and eagles and oxen. Readers throughout the medieval and early modern periods took this as evidence that unicorns were real creatures, mentioned in Scripture alongside ordinary animals. The translation created not the creature itself, but the belief that the Bible confirmed its existence. A fierce, real wild ox became, through translation and cultural interpretation, a legendary magical horse. These examples show us something important about how mythological creatures entered biblical imagination. Yes, the original texts contained real mythological elements, chaos monsters, hybrid beasts, spiritual beings. But they also contained ordinary dangerous animals described in vivid poetic language. And translators, working across cultural and linguistic boundaries, sometimes chose the most dramatic equivalent in their own tradition. They reached for dragons instead of large serpents. They reached for basilisks instead of vipers. They reached for unicorns instead of wild oxen. Each choice made sense in context. They were trying to convey the power, the danger, the untamable nature of these creatures. A dragon sounds more fearsome than a crocodile. A basilisk sounds more deadly than a snake. A unicorn sounds more impressively strong than an ox, even a very large ox. But cumulatively, these choices transformed the biblical bestiary. They populated Scripture with legendary creatures. They made it seem as though the Bible confirmed the existence of monsters from Greco-Roman and medieval European mythology. Modern translations have largely corrected this. Where the King James has dragons, newer versions have jackals or sea creatures or serpents. Where it has cockatrices, newer versions have vipers or adders. Where it has unicorns, newer versions have wild oxen. The text becomes more naturalistic, more historically grounded. The fierce creatures are still fierce, still dangerous, still poetically described. But they're identifiable animals rather than legendary impossibilities. Yet something is lost too. The older translations, with their dragons and basilisks and unicorns, had a certain power, a mythic quality. They made the biblical world feel more enchanted, more populated with wonders and terrors beyond the ordinary. Both approaches have their truth. The original Hebrew spoke of real animals in vivid, sometimes mythologically tinged language. The chaos monsters were theological symbols. The dangerous creatures were actual threats in the ancient wilderness. But the translators, they brought their own imaginations to the text. They saw dragons where there were serpents. They saw legendary creatures where there were fierce natural ones. And in doing so, they created a hybrid text, one that blended Hebrew poetry with Greco-Roman mythology with medieval legend. For centuries, readers experienced the Bible through that hybrid lens. The monsters created by translation choices became part of biblical imagination. They shaped how people understood Scripture. They influenced art and literature and theology. And even now, even knowing that unicorns were wild oxen and dragons were large reptiles and cockatrices were venomous snakes, even knowing this, there's something compelling about those translation choices. They reached for wonder. They reached for the most vivid, most powerful images available to them. They created monsters, not out of nothing, but out of the gap between languages, out of the space between cultures, out of the interpretive choices that every translator must make when confronting an ancient, poetic, vivid text that speaks of fierce creatures and untamed powers and forces that resist human control. The monsters were already there in the original, but the translation choices made them more monstrous, more legendary, more impossible. And in doing so, they created a biblical bestiary that has haunted Western imagination for 2 millennia. Dragons in the wilderness, basilisks in the ruins, unicorns that cannot be tamed. Real animals transformed by language into legendary creatures. Poetic imagery hardened into mythological fact. Translation choices that created monsters, and in creating them, shaped how countless generations understood the biblical vision of a world populated by powers and creatures beyond ordinary comprehension. The words crossed languages. The creatures crossed from history into legend. And the text, through translation, became more mythologically dense, more monster-filled, more wondrous and terrible than perhaps even the original authors imagined. This is the power of translation. To transform, to amplify, to create, through choice and interpretation, monsters that will dance forever in the ruins of language itself. Resolution. Chaos contained. We've journeyed through so much. The cosmic order and its shattering. The rebellion in heaven and the birth of demons. The giants and the chaos monsters. The named powers and the underworld. The creatures of wilderness and the monsters created through translation. All of it speaks of chaos, of forces that threaten order, of beings that resist the structure of creation. But that's not where the story ends. It can't be where it ends. Because underlying all of this, underneath every rebellion, every monster, every manifestation of chaos, there's a promise. A vision of resolution. Of chaos not just contained, but transformed. Defeated. Even celebrated. Let's begin at the beginning. In Eden. The garden that God planted. And from Eden, water flows. A river, Genesis tells us. A river watering the garden. And then it divides. It becomes 4 rivers. For streams flowing out from the central point, this place of divine presence and perfect order. The Pishon, flowing around the land of Havilah where there is gold. The Gin, winding through the land of Cush. The Tigris, going east of Assyria. The Euphrates. 4 rivers from one source. Water, life, blessing, flowing outward from the center. This is the opposite of chaos. The chaotic waters of the deep, the Tiham, they're formless, threatening, pressing down with weight and darkness. But the waters of Eden flow with purpose. They bring life. They divide in ordered ways. They know where they're going. This is water as blessing rather than threat. Water as the carrier of life rather than the bringer of dissolution. The rivers of paradise flow from the presence of God, from the ordered center, outward into the world, bringing fertility and goodness wherever they go. The prophet Ezekiel sees a vision of this same pattern restored. In his vision of the restored temple, water flows from beneath the threshold. At first it's just a trickle, ankle deep, then knee deep, then waist deep, then deep enough to swim in, a river that cannot be crossed by foot. And wherever this river flows, life follows. Trees grow on its banks, bearing fruit every month. Their leaves are for healing. Fish fill the waters. Even the Dead Sea, that body of water so salty that nothing can live in it. Even the Dead Sea becomes fresh where this river enters it. Fishermen stand along its shores. Life conquers death. Order conquers chaos. The river from the temple is the river from Eden. The pattern repeating. Water flowing from the place of divine presence, bringing life, transforming desolation into fertility, making the wasteland bloom. Revelation sees the same vision. The river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the street of the city. On either side of the river, the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. The leaves of the tree for the healing of the nations. Eden restored. The original pattern fulfilled. Water flowing from the divine presence. Life spreading outward. Trees offering both fruit and healing. The chaos conquered not through violence, though there is violence in these visions, but ultimately through the outpouring of life itself. Where chaos brings death and dissolution, divine order brings life and healing. Where the sea monsters embody threat and terror, the rivers of paradise carry blessing and fertility. The contrast is absolute. But what about those monsters? What about Leviathan and Behemoth and all the chaos creatures we've discussed? What about the beasts rising from the sea? What about the dragons and the powers of darkness? The biblical vision is clear. They will be defeated. Finally. Completely. Utterly. Isaiah speaks of this. In that day the Lord with his hard and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan the fleeing serpent, Leviathan the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. Leviathan, the chaos monster that seemed untamable, that made the deep boil, that no weapon could pierce. Leviathan will be slain. The sword that Job couldn't wield, God will wield. The creature that represented untamable chaos, it will be tamed through its destruction. The same fate awaits all the chaos powers. The beasts of Daniel are judged and destroyed. The dragon of Revelation is thrown into the lake of fire. The sea that gave birth to monsters. There is no more sea in the new creation. The source of chaos itself is removed. This is eschatological victory. The final judgment. The complete defeat of everything that resisted divine order. No more rebellion. No more chaos monsters. No more forces threatening to unmake creation. But here's where the vision becomes almost playful. Almost celebratory in a way that's startling. Because in Jewish tradition, in the rabbinical writings and the apocalyptic texts, the defeat of the chaos monsters isn't just about their destruction. It's about their consumption. Remember we mentioned this earlier. At the great messianic banquet, at the feast celebrating the arrival of God's kingdom, what will be served? Leviathan, Behemoth, Ziz. The 3 great chaos monsters, slain and prepared as food for the righteous. The creatures that inspired terror, eaten. The beings that represented untamable chaos, served at table. The monsters that seemed beyond human power to confront, transformed into nourishment for the people of God. This is the ultimate reversal. This is chaos not just defeated but repurposed. The energy that went into creating terror now goes into sustaining celebration. The creatures that threatened life now give life through their flesh. Some texts describe it in elaborate detail. Leviathan and Behemoth will fight each other first. The land monster and the sea monster in cosmic combat. They'll destroy each other in the battle. And then God will prepare their flesh for the feast. The righteous will eat from creatures that were too dangerous to approach in life. They'll feast on impossibility made edible. The terror will become taste. The chaos will become calories. It's almost comic in its completeness. The victory so total that the enemy becomes the meal. This transforms everything we've discussed. All the chaos, all the monsters, all the rebellious powers and terrifying creatures. They're not permanent. They're not eternal. They're not even, ultimately, particularly significant. They're ingredients. They're meat for a future feast. They're provisions waiting to be prepared. Their threat is real now. Their power is real now. People suffer under the beasts. Nations are devoured. The chaos causes real damage, real terror, real death. This isn't minimized. This isn't dismissed. But it's temporary. It has an expiration date. The monsters are already marked for the table. The chaos is already scheduled for defeat. The outcome is certain even while the struggle continues. And when that day comes, when Leviathan is slain and Behemoth is defeated and Ziz is brought down, when the dragon is thrown into the lake of fire and the beasts are destroyed and the sea is no more, when all of that happens, the rivers will flow. The waters of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne. The tree of life bearing its fruit. The leaves for healing. The nations walking by the light of God's presence. No more curse. No more night. No more sea. And somewhere, in some corner of the great celebration, perhaps there's a table laden with the flesh of chaos monsters. A feast commemorating their defeat. A meal that transforms terror into nourishment, threat into sustenance, chaos into the very food that strengthens God's people. This is the biblical vision of resolution. Not chaos destroyed in a way that leaves scars and trauma, but chaos transformed, consumed, digested, made to serve the purposes of life and celebration and healing. The monsters dance in the ruins now. The demons wander. The beasts rise from the sea. The little horns speak their blasphemies. The powers of darkness exercise their authority. All of this is real. All of this happens. But the rivers are already flowing. The water of life is already available. The tree of life is already growing. The future feast is already planned. The resolution is already determined. Chaos is contained. Not yet eliminated, but already marked for defeat. Already scheduled for transformation. Already destined to become not a permanent feature of creation but a memory. A story told at a banquet. A meal consumed in celebration of victory. The cosmic order we began with. It will be restored. More than restored. It will be perfected. There will be no more threat of chaos because chaos will have been fully defeated. There will be no more sea because the source of monsters will be removed. There will be no more curse because everything that corrupted creation will be gone. And in its place, rivers flowing from the throne. Trees bearing fruit and healing. Light that never dims. Life that never ends. Order not as rigid control but as perfect harmony. Creation as it was always meant to be. The angels will maintain their hierarchy. But there will be no more rebellion. The nations will have their place. But there will be no more chaos monsters ruling them. Humans will dwell in the city. But there will be no more wilderness threatening from outside. Everything ordered. Everything healed. Everything flowing with life. And perhaps, just perhaps, at the great feast celebrating all of this, someone will take a bite of Leviathan, will taste the flesh of the chaos monster, and will smile, because the thing that once inspired terror is now just food. Nourishment. A source of strength for the next age. Chaos contained. Chaos defeated. Chaos consumed. And in its place, the rivers of paradise flowing forever from the presence of God. This is the end of the story. The resolution. The promise that all the chaos, every monster, every demon, every rebellious power, every force that threatened to unmake creation, all of it is temporary. All of it is already defeated in principle, waiting only for the defeat to become manifest in reality. Until that day, the struggle continues. The chaos persists. The monsters remain. But they remain on borrowed time. They swim in seas that are already scheduled for elimination. They inhabit ruins that will be rebuilt. They exercise power that is already marked for transfer. The resolution is coming. The rivers are flowing. The feast is being prepared. And chaos is already contained, even while it still thrashes. Already defeated, even while it still threatens. Already transformed, even while it still terrifies. This is the promise. This is the hope. This is the resolution that biblical mythology points toward, a world where chaos is not a permanent feature, but a defeated enemy. A consumed feast. A memory of a threat that once was but is no more. The rivers flow. The tree grows. The light shines. And somewhere, the chaos monsters wait for the sword and the feast. Terror becoming celebration. Monsters becoming meals. Chaos becoming nothing more than a story told in a world of perfect order and endless life.